Well, the instructions from Gus, not a surprise to anyone, were make it kind of a little funky, a little offbeat. And so this is a combination of a couple little prayers that we do at our home. We usually don't sing them, but we're going to sing them because Gus asked for that. We'll be singing it to the tune of Good King Wenceslas. Gus is our Good King Wenceslas for today. So give it a try, and if you're just getting it, I might have us do it twice. Here we go. We'll start right here. Earth who gave to us this food, Sun who made it ripe and good, Mother Earth and Father Sun will not forget what you have done. Bless, O God, this food we pray. Bless us too throughout this day. Keep us safe and close to you, kind in all we say and do. Amen. Blessings on our day.
For Faith and Learning, I'm a relative newcomer to Augsburg. I've only been here 28 years. Relative to some of you in the audience and our speaker, that pales by comparison. This is the 13th of our vocation lunches, which was one of the programs that grew out of our Lilly grant that we've continued on with the Center for Faith and Learning. The lunches provide us an opportunity to gather as a community to recognize and celebrate the vocational journeys of faculty and staff, to model called lives of service, and as well as to build a community rooted in Augsburg's institutional calling. I can't think of a finer example than Don Gustafson to provide us with insights on his vocational call. When I asked Gus, I didn't realize that this was his 50th year. Gus, 50 years, that's over 1/3 of the life of the college. It's a long time. Gus was very quick to point out, make sure you tell everyone, and so when I've been greeting people, I've been telling them, this is not a retirement party. That Gus is indeed, indeed. He's scheduled to teach a full slate of courses next year. I got to know Gus when I first arrived at Augsburg, and then I thought of him as the czar of interim. Those of you who are relatively newer than me won't remember, but we used to have an interim in January, and when I came, Gus was the one that had the dubious honor of herding us cats to get around to getting our descriptions in. Gus would send us gentle, and in my case, not always so gentle reminders that the course descriptions that were late needed to come in. I learned then to take instruction from Gus and to pay attention to his requests. A more recent request was to keep my introduction short. Gus, among other things, is an early adopter. He embraced being green long before it was popular. And you'll see the little slips of paper on your table that pale by comparison to the actual color of his office, but that invite you to an open office this afternoon at 2 o'clock. I'm not sure where you're going to fit everyone, Gus, but that will be your problem. Gus is indeed a colleague in the best sense of the word. And as attested by the over 145 people that are here today, this is by far and away the largest of these gatherings that we've had, including over 15 emeriti, as well as a note. Marilyn Giselquist is here, and she had sent me a note that Orlo had asked that I read. And so those of you who are, again, newer, might not know that Orlo Giselquist was a member of the history department for a number of years, retired 20 years ago, something like that. Anyway, Orlo was unable to be here, but he sent this note. Augsburg is fortunate to have had the service of Don Gustafson for the past 50 years, and we are fortunate to have his friendship. And I certainly would second that. I asked Gus what people at Augsburg might not know that he might be willing for me to share, and he sort of got one of his typically quizzical looks, and he said, well, when I was hired, I think the college had high expectations about my potential as a leader. I think they might be disappointed. His words, not mine. I can't speak about the disappointment, but as to leadership, my sense is that leadership comes in many forms. People lead by example, modeling what it means to be a teacher. Gus has been and continues to exemplify dedication to teaching and learning and service and devotion to students. On a final personal note, early on, when I started at the college, I had not as yet finished my dissertation. And while Gus didn't write it for me, the dean's not here, no. While Gus didn't write it for me, it was Gus that actually inspired me to get off my butt and finish it. As I said, I do what Gus tells me to do. Please welcome Professor Gustafson.
Hello, scholars, friends of scholars, supporters of scholars. I didn't expect I was going to tear up at the beginning, but I have, and I'll probably keep tearing up, and maybe some of you will also. Anyway, I think this is kind of fun. You have complimented me so much by your presence here today. I'm old-fashioned. There's no computer backup, none of that stuff. You've just got to have to listen to me. And Tom didn't mention it, but when we first started talking about it, I told him, if I have to have a title, I want it to be Rustic Ruminations. Why? Well, most of you know I live farther from campus than anybody else. It's 74 miles from from our garage to the parking lot here. And ruminations, well, most of you people aren't farmers or farm. How many of you did grow up on a farm? Oh, hey, well, it's an older, hooray. Why do I say that? I understand that the second meeting for ruminations is chewing the cud. And in a sense, maybe that's what I'll be doing today, chewing the cud a little bit. But first of all, I have something else. As I was preparing this, it suddenly dawned on me, finally, I have a chance. You know what? I think it was 2 decades ago, I had a rather disturbing experience here. I was teaching the Modern World course. I had assigned my students to read the article that Time magazine had written in 1936 or 37 when they declared Adolf Hitler the man of the year. And I said, I want you to read this article and then come up with an essay of your impression, your picture of what was Adolf Hitler like at that point. Well, most of the kids did very well. I read their papers, of course. But there were 2 or 3 who, hey, they didn't have to read the article. They knew Hitler was a bastard, and they really let me put that in the paper. Well, that morning when I handed back those papers, I complimented the ones who had done well, and then I guess I got carried away, because I really was I thought I'd done a decent job of teaching. And I was really irritated by these 3 or 4 students who had not written on the basis of the article. And I said something I know I'd never said it in class before. I said, but while many of you did really well, very well, there were 2 or 3 of you who really effed up. And I said the word. I didn't use just the initial. And then I went on with the class. Well, you know what? I hadn't been back in my green office more than 15 minutes when the associate dean was down in my doorway. Shaken. Is it true that you really did this? You said this in class? That's not a word that Augsburg students are aware of. And certainly not faculty. And I was given very definite instructions that at the next class period, I must apologize for this misdemeanor, almost felony. Well, class was on Thursday. Next one was on Tuesday. I mulled about it over the weekend, but I did as ordered. Tuesday morning, I apologized to the class. They looked at me, not having the vaguest idea what I could be talking about. And then, having done so, I reported to the dean's office, mission accomplished. Was it all over with? No, it's been growling within me over the years, and every so often I have thought, someday there's going to be a moment for me to get back. And hey, it's this one. Are you ready? Fuck, fuck, fuck. Oh, love you people. Well, now let's start chewing the cud. You know, it's quite something to wake up, to begin to realize one is now an old-timer. There are some good moments about it. I find that people come and think I have some sorts of truths that I don't have, necessarily. There are other moments when it's just sheer fun. I can't remember how many years ago it was, but one spring, right after our usual faculty dinner, or lunch like this, and at those faculty lunches, those people every 5 years get some sort of a memento or honor and whatnot. And I can't remember if it was my 40th or 45th, but I got a little box, nice memento. I got back to the office, and my secretary said, "Well, Gus, what was in the box?" And I opened it, and it was a nice little medallion with the Augsburg crown printed on it. And she looked at it and said, "Is that all? Gus, you should have gotten an urn." And then she realized maybe that wasn't the right thing to say. But Heather, thanks anyway. There's something else, though, good about having been around a place for a while. Whether it's rut or stability, I'm not sure. But I'm lucky because as I walk around this campus, I'm reminded of all sorts of things that were in my day or earlier. And some of you I can see out there are going to, I hope, gyrate with what I have to say. I remember particularly certain personalities. There was Mrs. Johnson. Who was she? She was the custodian in our hallway. Listening to her talk, it sounded like she had just gotten off the boat. She had really a Norwegian brogue. But wonderful, one of these salt of the earth sort of people. And I soon learned every time she came in my office, to empty the wastebasket, she'd look at it. And if there was quite a bit in the wastebasket, she would say, "Oh, you've really been working." And if there wasn't much in the office, she would say nothing but look at me as if, "Oh, you're one of those slough-off professors again." So help me, while she was our custodian, I never threw a piece of paper anywhere. I carried it with me back to my office so Mrs. Johnson would be impressed. I don't think I ever walked down that newly carpeted hallway of the first floor of the science building, but what I remember, probably one of the most genteel, remarkable women of this campus, Mildred Joel. She was our registrar. Remarkable individual. And beyond that very gentle properness, there was a tremendous caring. Hey people, back in those days, the days before graduation were really hectic. Hey, in those days, some of you remember, we had to have grades of seniors in within a couple of hours of the final exam. And then the registrar had to go put it all together and check. And I think every year there would be 1 or 2 or 3 seniors who were told on Sunday morning, pack up your gown, you're not graduating, you didn't quite make it. I remember, though, one Saturday night, I think it was about 10 minutes to 12, the phone rang. And who was it? It was Mildred Joel. And she said, Gus, there's this character, Gary, and he's your advisee, isn't he? And I groaned a little bit. Yes, he was my advisee. And she said, I figured up his history major GPA, and it comes out to 1.97. And that meant he could not graduate. And she said, can we do something about this? And we hemmed and hawed and talked, and she read me things and added up. And finally, one of us came up with the idea, that one course where he got a 1.0, that really doesn't have to be part of his major. Couldn't we just leave it out? And Mildred said, well, probably we can. Let me check. Uh-oh. Am I doing that? I said, damn microphone. I said to Mildred on the phone, or she added it up, and it came out to be now 2.04. And Gary graduated. That was Mildred Joel. Finally, though, there's somebody else I must mention. Somebody you all know by name, and think of it as being bricks and windows. Gerda Martinson. Now, she was really quite a woman. I came here during her last years as Dean of Students. And Gerda she was the one who ran around and did all the things that the men who ran the school didn't think of doing. If she had been here today, she would have been the one to check that the flowers were on the table in the right places and so on. And I had a great deal of respect for Gerda. Remarkable woman. When she was about to retire, she was asked to stay on a few more months and be the chairman of the centennial celebration. This was 1969. And, she agreed. And she was given the office at the southwest corner of Memorial, where Andy Aoki now resides. And it was fun to have her just down the hall. And when she finished the job and packed up and left, hey, Gerda was human like all of us. She had her ways, her foibles. And here came one of them. As she was leaving that office, she said, I really think this office should always be occupied by a woman. Because, as Gerda said, I don't know how a man would react listening to just across the hall ladies flushing the toilet. Anyway, wonder what they'll say about us in 30 years and our little foibles. But enough about people. When I came here, things were different, as you would expect. How were they different? The day I arrived for my job interview, I had a little trouble finding the school. I had no trouble finding a parking place. And I walked into at that time, the main entrance, which was down at the corner of the science building. And I walked up the steps, and there was a counter. Oh, and there was absolutely nobody around. The place was deserted, except behind the counter was the woman who sort of kept this place operating, Millie Nelson. Some of you know her name because there's a seminar room down on the first floor here. Millie Nelson, I, of course, didn't know who she was, and I said, well, what's happening? Where is everybody? And Millie said, well, I'm sure that Dr. Chrislock and Mr. Giselquist will be back very shortly. Everybody's at Como Park for the all-school picnic. Can you imagine an all-school picnic today? Anyway, things back then were done a little differently. Do you know how I got tenure? Amazing. I had been here 5 or 6 years, and I can still remember I was in the hallway, and Carl Chrislock, whose office was right across from mine, we were both unlocking our doors about the same time, and Carl said, "Gus, you're going to be getting your PhD in a couple weeks, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, I'm hoping to." And he said, "Well, I think it's time you get tenure. I'll tell the dean." I feel so... I was so lucky because I know today I would probably not get tenure. I don't think I'd even be hired by this place. However, things were just more informal back then. But there was a limit to informality. Hey, if this had been back in the 60s, I certainly wouldn't have been wearing this in this occasion, nor would I have had something in my ear. And there probably would not have been another gentleman in this audience who, without a tie, a few would be daring enough to be wearing sport coats. So there were some differences. I suppose I could go on and suggest others, but that's enough. I want to suggest that as I have thought back over these years, there have been certain things that have been very important to me. One of those things is that there seem to have always been individuals around who affirmed me. Hey, I had some bad moments at this place. Haven't we all? There were times when I didn't have a good thing to say about Augsburg College. But then I think most of us have to admit that in being employed by an institution, it's a love-hate relationship. I probably am the only one of the faculty here who, this was a low point, even lower than my classroom F experience. Would you believe it? I was at a faculty meeting when a colleague asked for the floor and spent 12 minutes detailing how I was a dehumanizing force. But fortunately, there were people who buoyed me up at that point. I think, I see Gene Skibby smiling out here. I remember at least 3 distinct times when Gene said something to me in the hallway or where it just made my day. I've appreciated that. Hey, and to have that few lines from Orlo, what an affirmer he was for me while I was here in these years. I know there were times he shook his head. I remember how he reacted when I said, "I'd really like an electric pencil sharpener for my office." But I got it. People, your presence here today is affirming me. I'm grateful. And I'm particularly grateful to those of you who have been my colleagues. And as Tom said, there's 16, 17 of you who are faculty emeriti or faculty spouses. And for the sake of it, would you please raise your hands if you're in that category, just so I can see who you are? And also, it's not just faculty. Students. Here we go again. Students regularly affirm us. And today I have a number of students from last year still here. Am I doing it? We needed a break. Anyway, those of you who have been in one of my classes over the years, please stand up. I'm honored by your presence. I suspect you were going to comment, but it'd be fun to hear Gus and not have to worry about a pop quiz at the end of the day. I want you to know really was part of my first class here at Augsburg. Okay, are you able to hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, I'll try this. I have trouble being confined behind a podium. Anyway, I can't help at this point but stop and say, at this point, right now, I am so lucky. I am so incredibly lucky to be part of a department which is made up of individuals who are wonderfully affirming people. I'm not sure if we like each other, but we like working together. And we respect each other. Hey, you know who my department consists of? Well, there's Phil Adamo. One of my little things that makes me delighted that I occasionally have one. I remember when the 275 applications came in to fill Rick Nelson's place. And I remember reading through them and pulling Phil Adamo's file and said, here's somebody I think we should put in service. And we did. How lucky we are. Hey, look what Phil has done for us. Those of you who know, you never know what zany idea he's going to come up with. And there was a time when Phil brought us Cleo. And well, we're going to get Cleo back in his office. And it's really great fun to be able to tell people that just down the hall from me, we've got one of the world's experts in medieval produce. And then there's Jackie. Hey, Jackie just does it all. The scholarship she's been doing, and so forth. Rave reviews. And just a few days ago, a weeks ago, I learned something else about Jackie that does happen a lot. You know, some weeks ago, she was invited to come to the girls' basketball session and give them a pep talk. And she did. But you know what was really wowing? To somehow show a degree of something or other. After her pep talk, what did she do? She dropped to the floor and did 50 push-ups. And then I've got Bill Green. You know, in some ways it's amazing that Bill even looks at me. Why? When Bill was up for tenure, it was back in the days when each of us faculty and department members had to write an individual letter. And I wrote to the committee and I said, well, I think Bill seems to be a good teacher, but don't tenure him to the history department. Helped him out. Next, Jim. Jim comes through. Anyway, Jim was one of those first members of, was one of those 61ers. Anyway, I wrote that letter. Okay. Why did I not want him in the history department? Well, he came with degrees, but no degree in history. And I said, would the chemistry department accept anybody as a tenured person if they never had any graduate work in chemistry? I did history. Well, my voice didn't come up much. Bill got his tenure. But before that happened, those were the days that the candidate got to look at his or her file before it went to the committee. And a couple of days after I knew Bill had seen his file, he came by and stood in my office door. And I thought, oh man, what am I going to hear now? What did Bill say? He said, Gus, I read your letter. I understand where you're coming from. I appreciate it. And that was it. And since that time, I can't think of a single moment when Bill has expressed any kind of like, had our positions been different, I doubt it might be. And then finally, people, who else is in our department? Our chamberman, Michael. And hey, I wish all of you could have Michael. You know, of course, he's only half my age, so naturally he can do 13 times as much as I can. But we meet in the morning and our first question to each other, so how did your class go last night? And every so often, Michael will say, I grew. And other times, the students really came through, it worked. And I could respond similarly. Man, oh man, I have those grouping sessions too. Now, what? And is this better?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you. I should have known. Anyway, I've got to quit talking about this because I can already see that some of my department members are thinking, if Gus is this happy, we'll never get rid of him. I don't have to leave out this next section. It was about, I can't remember right, back in the late 80s. And I was teaching American history at and one day I did what we faculty occasionally do. I started complaining about a few things. And after class, a couple of the fellows came up, a couple of the fellows came up and said to me, nicely but very firmly, Gus, this is our college. Like you're knocking it. And I hadn't realized I think what I had said was something like, well, Augsburg is just one of several hundred small liberal arts colleges. Well, it bothered me. And I went home that weekend, and I came back to the next class period and said, people, I think there are some things that set Augsburg apart. We're like a lot of other small liberal arts colleges. We have some fine professors, some good programs. And I found three things that I thought gave us a distinctiveness. What were those three things? First of all, we were 4 blocks from a major university library. There are a lot of cow colleges that would have given their eye teeth to have that kind of resource for their students to use. What was the second thing? I was incredibly proud of what was then just emerging as the Center for Global Education. That was a remarkable group. We still have it. Why was it remarkable? Well, this is back in the days when student travel was just beginning to be a thing to do. What was Center for Global Ed? Center for Global Ed said, well, we're going to be slightly different. We're not going to take kids to Paris or the holy city of Oslo or things like that. We're going to provide opportunities for students to go to the underside. We're going to help students see the have-nots. And what's more, not only that, Center for Global said, we're going to have a slightly different sort of education. We're going to follow the philosophy of, I never get his name right, or what is it? There it was. Anyway, what sort of approach was it? I still remember the day Marie McNabb came to the faculty meeting. She was currently our dean. She had just been on one of the seminar, Center for Global Ed seminars in Mexico. She said, what's different? And hey, Marie McNabb was in education. This was her field. She said, we were in the van on the way down from Mexico City, and as we approached Cuernavaca, which is down in the valley, she said the van stopped at the top. We all got out and looked around at the city. We looked at our guide, our Center for Global Ed person, who said nothing. And after we had looked for a while, that leader said, well, people, what do you see? In other words, the approach of Global Ed is, we're going to put you in contact with people, we're going to show you things, and you make up your mind. You decide. Hey, and that Global Ed survived some of those days was quite amazing. Augsburg students didn't go. I think it was 4 years before a single Augsburg faculty went on one of those trips. I was one of them. And weren't you another one of them? Phenomenal 3 weeks in the Philippines. It still shakes me up. But why do I say it was touch and go days? Well, one of the first places that Center for Global Ed went to outside of Mexico was Nicaragua. Those of you who remember the 1980s, Nicaragua sounded like a dangerous place because the Contras were there. And you know what the Contras were. And one group that Joel sent down there had a couple of daring women from Wyzetta. And they weren't part of the group, and they came back horrified because they had had sessions with Contra leaders who knew they were communists. And having done that, having come back, what did they do? Well, they wrote letters to the Minneapolis Tribune, letting them know that here Minneapolis had a college that was incubating communists. You can imagine how pleased the president was. And the House and the development office had conniption. Unfortunately, Center for Global Ed stopped. What's the third thing? Remember I was in that three-thing business? The library, now Center for Global Ed. What was the third thing? My students didn't understand it, but it was important to me. I said to them, I appreciate the Augsburg faculty because they have the backbone not to award honorary degrees. And right? Remember those arguments, John? Those arguments? Oh, and I can remember the president coming to us and saying, please, you've got to vote these honorary degrees. And the faculty regularly said, no. Well, my class was a little bit mollified. And the next year, something else occurred to me. And what was that? I was in another, it was a class, and for some reason I had 3 or 4 fellows from across the river. You know, we have some institutions across the river who will occasionally send people here. And 2 of the fellows were wearing t-shirts. In big bold letters it said, "Education for Success." And I thought, no, that's nice. Somehow it didn't jive with me. And afterwards I thought, you know, I don't think Augsburg would have shirts like that. I was at an Augsburg that would have shirts that said, "Education for Service." Maybe didn't sell as much. But hey, that was what I was imbued with in my first years at this place. Well, people, I see some of you snickering. You know that times have changed, haven't they? I mean, the university library is still there, but with the coming of the internet, our kids can get so much that they don't need to go to the library for. What about for Center for Global Ed? It's still here. But they were so incredibly successful in surviving that the administration did the logical thing. They said, hey, you handle all our tours. And they are. The European places and so on. But fortunately, the gem, the basis of what Center for Global Ed was about, was still there with some of their courses. I wish I could go on and talk about some of them, but I'm running out of time. What about honorary degrees? Well, you all know that we have clever presidents who figured out a way to get around the faculty, and so we're now awarding honorary degrees almost by the dozen. I suspect that by the time our 2019 comes along, our sesquicentennial, honorary degrees will probably be door prizes at graduation. Can't you tell I'm totally neutral on this issue? I've got a few minutes left. I take seriously that this is a vocatio chapel, vocatio saint. And I want to say a couple of things about experiences I've had here at Augsburg in recent years that have affected me in a maybe not a deep, great spiritual way, and yet important things for me. 3, I'm Lutheran enough. 3 items. Besides, that gives you an idea how far along I am. What's the first thing? Hey people, I grew up in a rather pious, a very pious family. I was very interested in music. But like all of us who were thinking people, there were certain things about religious faith that left me at least unsettled. I wasn't clear about. One of the things I increasingly felt, somehow this Christianity is a no-win situation. If I do something good, I have to thank God for doing it through me, and God gets the credit. If I do something bad and wrong, then it's my fault. No win. There was this, I found myself frequently hearing or singing things like,
Oh, hey, our hymnal, I was from the Swedish Lutheran Church, and we weren't necessarily a Sagittarius, but we had a hymn that talked about groveling worldlings. Boy, if that isn't uplifting. However, I also had with trying to say, God, you're the potter, I'm the clay, do something with me. And then an event happened during the 1970s. An incidental event. We were about to make a major change here at make a major decision here at Augsburg. And somebody in the religion department, very appropriately, sent a letter out to all of us faculty. And saying, you know, that we are at a crucial time. We need to pray. Well, I was in one of my anti-Augsburg moods at the time. I got that letter and I glanced at it, crumbled it, and threw it. Mrs. Johnson was no longer our custodian, so I could just throw it close. Anyway, and afterwards I thought back on that letter, and I thought, I suspect if I'd read it carefully, I would have been told I should go home and pray and ask God to see to it that we made the right decision. And it dawned on me, hey, I don't want to pray that kind of prayer. I don't want to pray, God, you've got the strings, pull them, and so I can do the right thing. I realized, hey, I have been blessed with certain common sense, certain wisdom. And thank you, God, I'll make my own decisions. And I'll take the consequences. Now, people, that doesn't mean I gave up on God. Hey, I need to worship. I feel so lucky that over these 50 years I've been in a place where the chance to have daily worship was there. On the other hand, I wasn't going to be a lob of clay. But it makes me sound a little self-righteous and too, what shall I say? Well, I don't know what word here. But now, item number 2. Good therapy or wake up, I don't know what. Some of you who were here in the 80s may remember an incident. Maybe you'd rather have me not mention. What was that incident? Well, once again, we were short of money and we were trying to build things. And lo and behold, that marvelous G. Roy Carlson came up with noble alum. The kind of alum that Garrison Keillor would have said, yeah, he is our proper bachelor Norwegian farmer. Except this fellow was not a farmer. He came to Augsburg, and instead of going back to the farm, he got a job. I think it was with West Publishing. Did very well, good investments. And when he came to retirement age, and I can see the smiles, and some of you know where this is leading. Hey, when he came to retirement, he did a very un-American thing. He said, I've got too much money. I should do something with it, the extra. And so he took a healthy chunk, divided it in 3 parts. One part went to his family, nephews and nieces. One part went to his home congregation. And guess where the last part went? To his college. Hey, we were feeling great. That was wonderful. And then suddenly we found the turd in the punch bowl. What was it? During the 80s, various young people throughout the Twin Cities were often getting letters. They were young people on the verge of marriage, or about to get married. And they got letters telling them what you are about to do is something you shouldn't be doing. Why? Because they were often marrying across race lines, or they were marrying across denominational lines, and that was not God's will. These were very hurtful letters. Hey, the president's son got such a letter. Our department secretary's daughter got such a letter. And, of course, they were unsigned. But the I-team had figured out who was responsible. And one evening on the 10 o'clock news, guess what the I-team reported? They discovered that the individual who had been sending these letters was our noble Augsburg alum. Was that ever embarrassing? But I don't want to go into the embarrassment. What affects me about that is, can you really imagine anything worse than to do something that you think was right and proper, to spend hours of your time on it, to invest money in it, and then to somehow realize that what one was doing was all wrong. It was just the opposite of the good you were hoping to accomplish. Hey people, I remember reading when I was teaching the China course, how there was a time when missionaries in China, finding, of course, they had some Christian converts who had become opium addicts. And you know, they found a cure for these opium addicts. You know what the cure was? Heroin. Well, what I learned from that episode here of, hey, we all can make mistakes. We have to be careful that we don't make those bad mistakes. But finally, I got to get to point 3 because my time is running out. What's my point 3? People, I'll admit right now, I didn't come to Augsburg because God called me out to Augsburg. If God was calling me, I wasn't aware of it. I didn't really have a vocation. I came to Augsburg because it was a job. Because it gave me a chance to teach, which is what I wanted to do. And I've ever since been a little uneasy, if not downright irritated, when people pronounce, God is telling me to do such and such. Because somehow God never told me anything, or at least not that I was aware of. And then a couple years ago, a few of us faculty were together. We were talking about the capstone course, and those of you who don't know our system know that every senior has to take a capstone course, and one of the things we do in that capstone course is talk about meaning in life, talk about vocation, the word vocation, etc. And as we sat there, Barbara Lehman, social worker, who's currently off in Cambodia, Barb Lehman said, you know, I wonder if for some of us, vocation may not be something we're aware of at the end of our careers. It's not something we start out with. And I thought about those words since then. And hey, thank you, Barb. You triggered something. Because these recent years, I've begun to sense, whether it can be called a vocation or not, I think in my life I have done what I was meant to do, or what I could do. And what a satisfying experience that is. And now I'm really going to get mushy because at this point, something else. Not long ago, I ran across that line that all of you have heard. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Yes, you know that phrase? I was curious about it. I went to the man who frequently can answer my questions, Bruce, and Bruce very quickly informed me, well, that comes from Aristotle. Liberal arts, yes indeed. I like that phrase. Why? Because I can sit here now, I can stand here and say, you know, I have been just a small part of this institution. And yet, as a part, I have been able to contribute to something that is greater than the sum of all of us. I've been able to help a number of people have a good Augsburg experience. And what a wonderfully satisfying thing that is. And people, all I can do is somehow hope that for each of you, you can have that same sense of satisfaction. Hey, I've certainly goofed along the way, but the same feeling of, yeah, I've done perhaps what I was meant to do. And with that, people, cheers!
Very quickly, I'd like to thank a few people who helped make this happen. Certainly, our wonderful event staff who set this up and constantly transformed this space into a hospitable setting. So thank you. Please thank you. I'd also like to thank the food service, Avians, who prepared the food for us and served us and managed to get us through the buffet lines fast enough so that we could be in time for, you don't want to be late for a Gustafson lecture. So thanks to Avians. And finally, there are a couple people in particular I want to thank. Lauren Windhurst, who is our student worker, did a lot of behind-the-scenes work as well as helping set up the tables. Lana Field, who works on directing projects for the Center for Faith and Learning, and in particular Diane Glorbigan, who actually makes everything happen. So thank you. One last thing, a reminder, the little green, the hard to miss green pieces of paper on your table, there's the open office at 2 o'clock. If you want to see what green really looks like, go there at 2, and I'm sure you won't be disappointed. Thank you again for being here, and look forward to seeing you again in the fall. Thanks, bye.